So my name is Johan Widheden. I work for the World Wildlife Fund, leading a global network of climate ambitious companies called the Climate Business Network. I've previously worked with life cycle assessment as a researcher and consultant, and also building LCA into the sustainability work of AkzoNobel for a number of years. There we go. Okay, thank you. So I'm hoping this works, that you do not, do you see my presentation or my presentation, my presenter's mode?
It looks good.
Thank you. All right, so I was asked today, and thank you for asking, to give an introduction to the wider perspective of LCA and the kind of the wider perspective of the climate, and also going into a little bit of the science behind the science-based targets, of which WWF is involved a lot in developing. But first, I just, wait, sorry. Things are a bit, there you go. I want to ask, just put this question up for everybody. You know, I think, I don't know if everybody's asked themselves this, why you're working with life cycle assessment and what do you want to achieve with your work on life cycle assessment. So I'll get back to this question further down, but I want to start like maybe 15, 20 years ago when we started working with, I started working with developing targets and working in a company, and we had environmental management systems where we made kind of incremental decreases in carbon emissions each year, and setting those targets, maybe looking a little to competition, but otherwise things were looking great. We were reducing the emissions continuously. And then there was some projects, some initiatives that try to push the agenda, try to accelerate this progress by actually comparing companies and putting that competitive edge in there. That has all changed, I would say, a lot, because we saw that if we're continuing to do what we're doing, where will we end up? So looking into the future, where are we actually heading to? And then going back, what can we do to mitigate this and get us to where we want to go? And this was, of course, a lot thanks to the IPCC research. They showed us where we need to go. They showed us the vision, and they also gave us the challenge, of course, which is huge. And as you can see here, there are lots of scenarios, and of course, these are the ones that can possibly take us to a net zero economy. I've put half there in there because that's basically the carbon law, kind of simplifying these scenarios into halving each decade, which is basically what we need to do. And this climate science then gave birth to the Paris Agreement, which is kind of the basis for all the work now going on within governments. Governments are putting laws in place. They initiated the fossil-free Sweden, which I think is doing a great job in actually progressing our sectors towards a net zero. I heard now that they also have groups on different aspects that would recommend to the government how they can support our transition to a net zero in 2045. And of course, it affects a company. And I'll be focusing in this presentation on climate and companies, basically. And this, of course, you have a lot of push from customers, from laws that you have to adhere to. But more and more companies are also realizing that they can get a competitive edge in strengthening their brand through this work. There's a lot of support functions. And then I think SBTs, and especially SBTI, has a niche role in this, because they take the science and make it into company targets. So it's kind of the NDCs for business. So national determined contributions that all countries and governments are supposed to hand in. It makes this clearer to businesses. And the vision is, of course, and we have, I think, almost 1,100 companies on SBTI now, The vision is, of course, that this will become standard practice throughout the business world. So just getting into how do they do this? Well, we need to know the carbon budget. How much can we release? How much emissions can we release in order to stay below a certain temperature rise? And then allocating that to a sector, to a country, and obviously to a company, and making sure that they are reducing in line with the science and this temperature rise. A carbon budget, yes, we know how much the concentration in the atmosphere. From that, we can figure out, and we know the correlation between that and the temperature rise. So from that, we can figure out a remaining carbon budget that we have at our disposal. And then the next step is figuring out, okay, what curve, through what scenario and pathway can we reduce to stay in this budget? So this is choosing which scenario to take. And there's a group called Integrated Assessment Modeling Consortium. And these are researchers from IPCC. They make more than 400 different scenarios of where we can actually be going. And what SBTI does is take these, and then they pull out the ones that actually get us to not more than 1.5 in temperature rise or well below 2. Because these are the two pathways that the SBTI recognizes. We used to include also 2 degrees, but since the IPCC report 1.5C came out, we realized that that's just too slow. And then that narrows the scenarios down. And then what we do is to take out those that are not within the carbon budget that we have, and those that peak their emissions before 2020. We know that didn't happen, or after 2025, because that will basically, it will be hard to get there because we have to reduce so steeply. From these, we make a median and a minimum linear reduction rate that needs to happen from 2020 to 2035. So this is basically how much the world needs to reduce their emissions in order to stay below these temperature limits. So then it's about allocating this to a company. Of course, me as a company, I can stay on that trajectory for 1.5, a minimum of 4.2% each year, or for 4.5 is the median over these 15 years. Or I can also do sector-specific methods. Not all sectors have this as yet. It's under development. And these are based on the International Energy Agency's, what they call energy technology perspectives. So they make a number of scenarios and of where the energy is used, the carbon emissions, and put that into each sector so that you can have intensity parameters for that sector. So this is how much CO2e you can emit per megawatt hour in the power sector, for example. And if a company then has done a lot of work previously and they have a low intensity compared to the sector as a whole, they will not get as strong a target in the SBTI. So these are kind of the two pathways you can do. For all your scopes, I'd say scope 3 is a bit different. We're a bit more lenient towards scope 3 because companies have not so much power over that. And I'll get back to scope 3 because it is really the challenge for companies. But anyways, okay, we know where we're going. We know how fast we need to reduce. It's time to get into the work of creating those solutions and deciding on those priorities to get there. And what gets measured gets managed. And this is, of course, where LCA is the background of, well, all the numbers that we're juggling here, right? But companies need guidance. There's a lot of guidance out there: GHG protocol, ISO standards, best practices, groups to connect to and be part of, such as, of course, the one that I'm leading also for companies. But the scope 3 in particular, I think scope 1 and 2, yes, we need numbers, but those are fairly easy to get currently. The scope 3 is where we're struggling. And we had a conference with our network partners, which are huge companies such as Sony, HP, Procter & Gamble, Volvo, H&M, IKEA, and a lot of those are still on the left side here. They're still using an input-output analysis based on financial numbers to get their scope 3 emissions. And of course, you can't manage that. You don't know when, if you're mitigating, if the supply chain emissions are going down. So we need primary activity and supplier data, and this is where LCA has a crucial role to play to get that out there and the guidance out there. And from that, I come back to how can your work and the work of LCA contribute to this path that we need to take. You know, what are the problems that we need to solve and the changes that we need to see? What is the theory of change to get there? What steps do we need to take? What's the role of LCA in this? And then, of course, what is your role with your experience and work to make this happen? And I know in research sometimes we get really bogged down and focused in one area and maybe not sharing so much. But in this case, you know, it's only together picking those puzzles to make the whole that we can actually move there faster and accelerate. So just ending up with a few thoughts for today from a layman like myself, not doing research. But I see LCA as a big contributor in some of the parts that I personally am involved with. Supply chain is definitely one, and I touched upon it. It's a huge challenge for companies, and it's actually, I think, one of the kind of limiting factors for them to progress right now is getting manageable data, getting guidance throughout the value chain so that all participants in the value chain can supply data and move forward. And yeah, I'm just connecting it to the topics of today. I think one way of doing this is to look at the sectors. You know, Plastics Europe, steel, other sectors have been producing life cycle data for some time, and also providing guidance. I think there's still companies who struggle with this. And I think through these sectoral roadmaps, going to Fossil-Free Sweden, looking at their roadmap, how can we support with data and guidance on getting this done, getting the measurements in there, and not only looking at qualitative initiatives. Circular economy, to my mind, this is a necessary development to get to a net zero. And we're kind of struggling a bit. We're looking at waste mostly so far. But this is about connecting the societal material flows through LCA. And I know that we're doing a lot of work, and you're probably doing a lot of work. I haven't been in this field for some time, but this is essential to get the life cycle perspective in there. I'm a reviewer for Vinnova on the circular and bioeconomy projects, and yeah, the LCA perspective is a lot of times lacking, both in the projects but also in the reviewer side. So this is an important role for LCA, I think. Avoided emissions is crucial, actually, because you know the business models and the products of tomorrow. We'd want them to transform the current markets. Many of those markets need transformation, and it's only these products that will make it. And a lot of that is involved in avoided emissions. And also coming back to me is a concept that we are working with called climate positive. And there are different strands of this. And some companies say they have climate positive products due to their avoided emissions, which sometimes is close to greenwash, and it's very hard to to measure. This is also why I think we skipped it when we worked out the scope 3 standard of the GHG protocol. We talked about scope 4 and all that, but that was kind of, no, it's too close to greenwashing and too hard to verify. But it's an important role for LCA to look at this and figure out how we can progress with the companies that need progression, but also hold back and make sure it doesn't greenwash. And then it's moving into other fields. We've been trying to do this for LCA a long time. I saw that you had biodiversity in today's discussion points, and of course, the bio-based is a big struggle for us and for society, I think. Can we really use and say that all bio-based materials has a zero contribution to climate change? To my mind, we can't. Maybe for some materials, but considering the 30 years that we have to get to net zero, some of those materials just won't cut it. And I think dividing up the emissions side and the kind of uptake side and making sure that we get the most out of both of those, so increasing the uptake and decreasing the emissions is imperative. And this is a big discussion where actually Sweden has a more positive role towards bio-based materials and energy than other countries. But how do we calculate that? Do we use a GVP of 100 years? I don't know. Should we use one for a closer time range because it's so urgent? I don't know. Something for you guys. And then with that, coming back to what we're now developing, SBTI is now developing into SBTN also, the Science-Based Network Targets Network, where we look at biodiversity and all the aspects that contribute or is detrimental to biodiversity. It's still just a guidance, and to my mind, it's kind of based on the ecosystem services review that were done quite a number of years ago. But how can you make that quantitative? And I think maybe that's the discussion for today. I think that's really interesting to find out how LCA can contribute with quantitative numbers, because that's the only way you can get it managed. So these are just some of my thoughts. And closing up, thank you very much. I hope that you've received some new information and some thoughts of just looking at the wider thing of what you do and what you're aiming for, and it's only together that we'll get there, not by individual companies or individual work. And LCA plays a crucial role on this path to net zero, to my mind. So thank you for all your work, and good luck with the day, and continue the good work.